Okay, we are live talking about Satan today.
Hail Satan.
Satan!
Just a normal topic of conversation for us.
Absolutely.
We're the Satanists, and we're going to have a sacrifice on the podcast.
Yeah, he had notes in his phone from 2 years ago, and I was like, there's no way you skipped this episode.
I went to open my notes to take notes while we were watching this episode. I have notes on these episodes for a discussion that we were meant to have in 2017.
I hope they aged well.
That didn't actually happen.
Yeah. I don't know what happened there.
It was too scary. That was why. Also, I wasn't here yet, so, I mean, what was the purpose of talking about it?
You know, true.
That's the real reason. They knew that Brian was coming one day, and we had to wait until then.
I just have so much to say about Lucifer, man.
Well, go ahead, get started. If not.
It's been a while since I've actually seen these, and the opening is kind of weak. Like the bitch where Tennant and Rose laugh is very, very annoying, and mislead with the Ood invading them is really dumb, even with the explanation being their voice box was broke. Outside of that, I really enjoyed this two-parter. I like the fact that it went a bit more cosmic and strange than we usually get. This is probably one of the better looking episodes of RTD's era, which tends to look like a soap opera, which it still kind of does. But it's got some decent effects for 2006. And it's got some nice kind of shot composition. I really love the camera angle, actually, when the episode opens in the cupboard. The way it's kind of going down a weird angle. I really like that. It's off kilter and it really kind of sets the mood. But like I said, I think this is probably the most tolerable Tennant and Rose's relationship is. Like, they have a little scene where they're talking about getting a house together. And it's actually really cute, even though I don't really care about the relationship at all. I think the cast is really decently developed for a one-off or a one-and-done kind of plot. I like the structure of it, the fact that all the setup is in the first part, and then the second part is just kind of a rush to get to the finish. It's actually really well paced, and it kind of just keeps going, because all the setup was done in the first episode. And yeah, I like the fact, again, like, it goes cosmic and weird, and I like stuff like that. I believe that's the voice actor who plays the devil is the same voice actor in Pyramids of Mars. And his voice is still creepy as hell, and that's a really great story. If you haven't watched Pyramids of Mars, is really great. One of the best.
Absolute classic.
Yeah, absolute classic. He's still really got a really intimidating voice, and he's really creepy and scary. And yeah, it's the whole power of love thing that kind of saves the day, but it's developed well, and it seeps into the team that they play with very effectively. So it's kind of a clunky thing to start off because there's a lot of plot build up to go before it gets going, and there's some really dumb moments. I hate that bit where Tennant starts saying, "Oh, humans are great," starts hugging people. It's really obnoxious and not very effectively done. I like this one quite a bit. It's probably one of the highlights of series 2, not a series I hold very highly. So yeah.
Well, allow me to play devil's advocate.
Bro.
Quite liked everything about this episode, and I didn't think I was going to, because the last time all I remember was the horrible CGI devil. Everything about this episode must be that hokey, right? And then I got this really compelling episode on just the nature of the unknown, which was really good, especially in a series where the main character kind of knows everything all the time. I think it makes these kind of episodes hit harder. As I said before, I love the cosmic horror of Midnight, which is why I'm glad we actually discussed that episode before this one, because they kind of go more into it with that. I also didn't find the David Tennant stuff with Rose super annoying, which I thought I was going to. I think the trick is that they were very understated with it. They didn't overstay their welcome with a lot of that crap, and it can really grate on you when they make it this like big important thing like they did in Journey's End. It was inoffensive here in a way that actually strengthened the episode, because at the end, when he's talking about believing in her, you really feel it in a way that you don't if they just made the whole episode this big like crescendo towards that. It's more of an offhand thing, and it's more just kind of grounding their relationship. So I like that a lot. I like the idea just in general of not showing certain things or making certain things unknowable. The scene where Tennant is talking to the devil, and through the knockoff Michael Fassbender, he kind of says, like, I existed before the universe, and he's like, that's impossible. And he goes like, is that your religion? And I was just like, ooh, like chills. And that voice, as you said, Daniel, was absolutely perfect. You always have to cast Satan really well, because if you don't, it completely undercuts the seriousness of the character, unless that's kind of your goal. So I really liked what they did with that. And even at the end, like, you don't get all the answers. And weirdly enough, I was looking at it, and you don't get all the answers about the other characters, which is also another parallel with Midnight. Satan kind of like mind reads a bunch of them and says things that we don't hear after that point, and they're never hinted at beforehand, but they're kind of like these little insights that he has. I guess through like omniscience or whatever he's got, and it just bled into that idea of the unknown. There are things even about the side characters that we don't know in this episode. We never find them out, and even at the end, they don't know who the Doctor and Rose are. They just kind of popped in and popped out. We know because we've been watching them from the very beginning, but the characters themselves have all these unanswered questions, and they never touch on it again, and they don't need to. It's, I think, stronger in a lot of ways to leave a lot of question marks, and the contrast between this and a regular episode, I think, makes it even better in a lot of ways. I kind of wish they'd go into the cosmic deity level stuff more often with Doctor Who. When they can do it properly, it's very, very strong. I've realized that like Tennant was the last Doctor, at least for me, where you could kind of allow him to feel powerless, and that propelled the episode farther. I never got that sense with 11 or 12. Moffat just has a way of kind of making the Doctor always in control, which works in a certain way, but it wouldn't allow, in my opinion, for an episode like this to happen again. That's generally my thoughts on the episode. It's probably one of my favorites, actually, of RTD's era now, going back through it again, and I can't believe I missed it the first time I went through. It was just kind of like another episode for me, but I remember having these little niggling feelings about it, like, I think there's more here, so I'm glad I went back and watched it for this.
The voice actor for Sutek in this story is Gabriel Wolfe. I just want to mention his name because, one, he's a really great voice actor, and two, I love his name. It's like something out of a fairy tale. Gabriel
I'll be looking
Wolfe.
this up after the podcast is over.
Yeah,
Sorry, yeah.
I didn't get to rewatch it pretty recently, like a couple months ago, so I didn't feel like I needed to watch it like last night or anything. I do really like this one. I just feel like Brian says it's more of like how mysterious in the atmosphere, and how I just like they went to this really weird place. Like there might be more to the universe than we really know. Not even so much as a religion thing. They're just so out there. We can't even like comprehend them and stuff like that. As far as like the Dr. Rose stuff, that's the only point that I would think bad, and that's only at the very end. I actually like Rose throughout most of the episode, like if she's getting a team together. But my own problem with at the very end, it becomes more of the Lord and Savior Rose is coming to save the day. I don't like that. That's just too much. It's way too much and over top. And like I think Daniel said, how the Doctor is just so obnoxious about loving humans, but that is a problem that's, I think, throughout the series. Yeah, I think this is a really good, mysterious. I like that they keep a lot of stuff in the dark episode. I wish we had more stuff like this in just the atmosphere, and it's not an ugly looking episode for a Russell T Davies episode. Like, I'm surprised. Like, I know the devil looks kind of funky, but it's still just has a lot of like, I want to say gothic or dark look about it, which I like. But yeah, I just wish there was more like really dark, mysterious episodes like this.
Yeah, I basically agree with what was said. I think the creepy atmosphere is good. I feel bad because it was like torrentially raining outside. I couldn't quite hear the dialogue that David Tennant was saying while he was going down in the pit. I had to read it in the transcript.
Yeah, we had to look up the transcript for this episode because Eden couldn't hear some of the dialogue.
Yeah, I do really like the idea of there's some things that even the Doctor doesn't know, and he appreciates that, and he appreciates the idea that like people just go after what they don't know. Like he hugs the captain after he's like, we came because it was there and we were interested.
Even though you know, in a realistic scenario, they'd only go there for capitalist reasons.
Or for science.
I laughed when Dan said all the one-shot characters felt built up, because Nick and I were noting that there are two people who just die and have no lines or name.
It's so weird that like you have this really well-rounded like cast of supporting characters, even if like most of them don't have like an arc over the course of the episode. They feel like fleshed out real people. And then you just have these two guys because we need a body count. They get introduced in the scene that they die in. They have barely any dialogue. It's kind of ridiculous.
But yeah, I really liked Rose in this episode, actually. And like, I like that if Ten and Rose, you can see it like that, but if you don't, you can also just see it as like two platonic buds just stuck in a weird situation. I really liked that laughter when she was like, we can just turn back, if anything bad happens, we can just turn back.
The exact point that Dan said he found obnoxious.
They turn to each other and burst out laughing.
I feel like the editing on that scene was weird.
I don't know. Maybe it was mostly enshrined in darkness, but I didn't find the Satan effects that bad. But yeah, genuinely really good episode. Some really good shot composition with Ten going down further and letting himself go and drift down.
That bit where he's like just descending against pure blackness is like, that might be the image that I choose to be the thumbnail for this video, because that's very striking.
I mean, yeah, like everything seemed pretty like beats that maybe didn't rub with everybody. Like we said, I loved that "Is That Your Religion" line. He always puts everything within the universe, like not for the universe. And yeah, man, it's really good. It's really good. And I like that, the more quiet, dramatic build-up, and then everything comes to a head in part 2.
I have a lot of things to say in response. Like, well, first of all, with the bit with Rose and Ten laughing, I agree that's kind of obnoxious just on the level of, like, a lot of scenes that they have together throughout Series 2 are obnoxious.
Yeah.
It did feel kind of fakey. I don't know if it's in the script or if it's these two actors consciously trying as hard as they can to be like cutesy. But whenever like Ten and Rose get overly cutesy is when it feels really forced and like,
They felt like they were trying to be like arrogant on purpose.
I thought that exchange was edited weird because Rose is like, we could always just turn around and go back. And you'd expect there to be like at least a couple seconds pause before they start laughing. But like she finishes that sentence and immediately they both burst out laughing. It feels really odd.
In fairness, I think it's just really hard for actors to fake laughter naturally.
Yeah,
I always go back to one of my favorite laughs in Cleavon Little when Gene Wilder says, salted ear, morons. Cleavon Little laughs. That is the most natural sounding laugh.
Good Will Hunting is another good example because Robin Williams improvised some of his dialogue.
In Shaun of the Dead, Nick Frost improvised a line in every take they did just to make Simon Pegg laugh naturally. It's in the outtakes as well. It's really funny.
Yeah, but like the Sarah Jane episode, apparently like David tended to get Rose and Sarah to laugh. That really was real.
Oh, I hope that's true, actually.
Kitten makeup. He was like face painted as a kitten.
At this point, it's pretty well known that I think of two-part stories as like one long episode, and I tend not to treat them as two separate pieces. I just think of them as one whole thing. With this one, I was surprised that like I felt a pretty even split between part 1 and part 2. In general, I think this is a really great story, but I much prefer The Impossible Planet to The Satan Pit, just because I like more of the atmosphere and the build-up as opposed to the running around like in the air vents and stuff. Like Eden said, part 2 is where we get very action driven, and I much prefer the earlier stuff in part 1 where it's like I like Ida a lot because she like adds to the atmosphere. She's got this very like unintentionally creepy scientist vibe where they like point out the black hole for the first time. And the doctor's like, that's not possible. And she's just like, here we are, like near a black hole. We're not falling in any like discuss. And it's just like you can tell like the glee that she has for it. And she doesn't mean to be creepy, but it's kind of off-putting. Like just how excited she is for this very odd, deadly situation that they're in. And that like carries through. Yeah, I don't know, like to Brian's point about sort of like the nature of the unknown, something that we were discussing and like Brianna and I talked about is it's really interesting and nice to have an episode where the Doctor and Rose are like on the same page knowledge-wise, where like for once, like you said, he doesn't have all the answers. It's not like teacher and student where the Doctor is there to like answer any questions the companion or the audience might have. They both come into this situation completely blind. I like that this is a situation with the Doctor being powerless, but unlike some other episodes where we might make them powerless, like unlike Midnight, he stays pretty composed the whole time. Like he doesn't have any control over the situation, but he doesn't let that get to him really. And when the Doctor does seem like he's afraid or kind of like really put off by the situation, it's always very subtle. It's not like a freak out moment, which compared to everyone else who is actually freaking out, like, I remember at one point finding Rose annoying in this episode just because, like, okay, calm down. It's not that bad. And I'm like, what was I thinking? She is a 19-year-old girl from Earth who just had the existence of Satan confirmed for her. It's astonishing that she handles it as well as she does.
Also, she does a very 19-year-old girl moment towards the end where she's like, I'm staying for my love, just to die here.
Rip her away, and she's like,
And then-
no!
Yeah, they like knock her out just and take her anyway.
That was a moment that Brianna and I disagreed on, where Brianna was like, if it was me, I would just leave her there. And I'm like, no!
What? No.
What
She's
the
a child who's like, I'm gonna wait for my friend. Yeah, but the planet is going to be sucked into a black hole. I'm not gonna do that.
But love, though.
For love.
Love.
Well, also blind stupidity because the ship was being dragged into the black hole, so she would have been dead within minutes anyway.
What I find interesting is like what Lucy mentioned in regards to like Rose the Savior at the end. I don't have a problem with what actually happens because it's not something that any other person couldn't do. Where it's like Rose is on the ship and like she realizes that Toby is possessed and she's like,
Yeah.
okay, how can I get rid of him? And then she gets rid of him. She doesn't like do anything that's like super contrived or like hard to believe that she would do. She was totally in line with her character and fine. What I take issue with is specifically like the doctor putting her in that situation. I'm not sure how I feel about when we get to, oh man, if I destroy the prison, then Rose is going to be sucked into the black hole. Well, I'm going to do it anyway because I believe in her and I believe that she can find a way out of this. Given the information that the doctor has at that moment, for as much as he loves Rose and for as much as he like assumes that she can get herself out of a dangerous situation, I don't know if I would assume she could get out of that. She would be sucked into a black hole. I'm just going to trust that she can work out a solution. I don't know anything about the actual situation that she's in or what she could do to get herself out of that. I'm just gonna assume that she can do it.
He had faith.
My thing is with the whole Rose thing is it's not what she does is anything a problem with. Actually, what she does is smart and is actually fine. Like I said, I think Rose is fine in the episode personally. Just one episode where I actually kind of liked her and stuff. My problem is more how they just kind of built her up. Like she's going to figure a way no matter what, and she's just like the Lord and Savior. I'm like, bring it down, Tan.
That specific situation, like she's gonna save her.
I don't get the impression that like he thinks he's gonna make it out of that situation. I think he's just like, I believe in her to be able to save herself.
I don't have a problem with the whole fate thing because, you know, it's thematically linked. My only thing is like the plot mechanics of like the devil's plan to escape is kind of a bit wishy-washy and it kind of just makes sense. And I think it's because it's communicated entirely by David Tennant rambling on and on and on and on. It's just not communicated that well. Beyond that, I have no real issue with the ending.
I think the 10th Doctor is actually more annoying in this than Rose.
Wow. Well, it's odd because like I remember watching that scene and being like, wow, I remember this being way more rambly. And I remember this monologue going on longer. But no, I found it to be kind of more efficient than I remembered. Where like really there's nothing that he says in that scene that doesn't need to be said until we get to specifically the Rose element of it, which again, like you said, faith thematically linked. And like I suppose on that level it works. I couldn't help but think in the moment of like, okay, you believe in Rose to keep herself safe, fine. But how though? Like you're putting her in a real pickle here.
I need to make it absolutely clear. He believes in her and he's wrong. Like she does not get out of the situation, and I need to make sure everybody remembers that. He literally accidentally stumbles into the biggest Deus Ex Machina, which I guess is fine.
Okay, that annoyed me. He just finds the TARDIS and saves him.
Yeah, we got to do Rob's take.
I don't want to give the impression that I hate these episodes, all right? I like some aspects of them. To start off with, on a positive note, I think the Ood are an absolutely fantastic creation. They look great. The whole concept is brilliant. I do think in this story, even then, though, they are a bit wasted, just kind of being used to be possessed by the Ood. And the whole backstory about them being slaves is not really used much in the story. It's just kind of like, it's... You know, it's introduced. And at this point, we didn't know they were going to be coming back. They didn't come back for another season and a half. So it does feel like kind of a waste.
I was just going to say, I came out of this viewing feeling like the Ood were kind of one of those like creatures that got like heavily associated with the show. And I feel like that would not have happened if they didn't come back. Like, I think the Ood are an interesting idea and like an interesting creation. But we think of them fondly because they come back after this.
They're one of the more kind of effective mainstay monsters from the new series. Like, I think them and the Weeping Angels are the only ones that people really remember for good reasons. I don't think Selena remembered for decent reasons.
One thing is they look absolutely fantastic. The design of them is
great
just
design.
Some of the best in the history of the show.
Very Cthulhuian.
Yes.
I also think it's partly because they've also featured in Series 4, which is the most viewed series of the whole show in the UK when the show show was at its most popular. That's probably a big reason too.
Yeah. I was saying, like, the Revived series has a problem with not having decent recurring monsters to come back now and again. I think, like, the Weeping Angels are probably the most famous one. I think, the reason they viewed are because they look so effective. The only issue with them is that because of how their species works, they're difficult to write a villain story about. Like, the only reason they're in the Doctor's Wife, the only reason they were in there is because they had the costume lying around. They're difficult to bring back, which is a shame, but they're a really cool creation.
But the thing about them is they're not really villains. They're always just being used most of the time.
It's difficult to write an Ood story because they're not evil. They're not monsters. They're not a threat. They're not a conflict.
They're a tool.
So how about Ood Companion? That could fix it.
Amy and Rory had an Ood as a servant in their house.
I forgot about that, in the miniseries.
On Life, those mini episodes that Chibnall wrote before Series 7, they're pretty good, kinda, for mini episodes.
They're fun. They're kind of just gaggy things. They're grand.
I think it was kind of weird, actually, just going back to the Ood as, like, hard to write as villains. It's very weird that they kind of, like, half-assedly wrote, like, a resolution in this episode for the kind of the slave plot line. Because at the end, he, like, registers each individual Ood's death when the planet collapses. But they never really, like, gave about them before or after. When they come back later, they kind of get more distinct. But in this episode, they just kind of at the very end were like, oh, yeah, slavery is bad. Let's do a Aesop about that. And I'm like... Awesome.
It could have been just like a joke about how he has to read all of the Ood's names.
I couldn't understand like what they were going for in that scene. So I'm like, is this an anti-slavery thing? Like, are they registering them?
I'll comment on it in episode 1 and they never mention it again.
I think you're incorrect when you say that it's a joke, because like we can laugh about it because it's kind of silly, but I don't think it's remotely meant to be played for humor by the episode.
Unintentionally funny?
Yes.
The Ood as crew members. They didn't think of them as living beings. So we end with him like treating the Ood as proper crew members, and they get the send-off the crew member gets. The problem is, again, with like the Ood themselves feeling underutilized, that feels like a weird note to end the story on, because this story isn't about the Ood. Like, we get a couple of scenes about how their situation is kind of messed up, but at no point do I think like the central crux of this story is the Ood situation. They're just kind of there.
It's Satan.
Yeah, because the slavery thing is brought up like briefly in the first part, and they just kind of hand wave it. Pretty much dropped by the time the Satan stuff comes up.
I don't know whether Davis was planning to deal with it later, because of course they did make a whole episode about it in Series 4. Yeah, I can sort of give them a pass for that, considering they did come back to it. But for this story, it does feel like it's handling the bit.
I had a weird problem with that, with Rose asking, since when do humans have slaves?
Rose has the line, since when do humans need slaves? And it's like, Rose.
No, the human race has never ever had slaves, ever.
Definitely not right now.
Especially because
they're in Britain.
I think it's a consistent character trait of Rose just being really stupid.
Rose is someone who paid attention in history class.
Yeah, I don't think that was meant to be the implication that she was ignoring that, you know, slavery was a part of her own human history. I just think it's awkwardly stated the way she is for her to be just kind of outraged that they're kept as a slave race species. I think it's funny because it has the same kind of awkward, unintentional implication that the house elves do in Harry Potter with the benevolent slaves. Unlike Harry Potter, it actually gets addressed later. You could make a very forced argument, oh, the whole thing's about beliefs, and their beliefs are in other people, and that's why they get controlled, or blah, blah. But that's a stretch.
The only problem with J.K. Rowling's work.
Let's not go there.
Never did anything bad again.
The Ood really do feel kind of tangential to the rest of the story. I have the same feeling with this that I had coming off of, like, Kerblam. This is the kind of thing that I feel like this show should just feel entitled to do sometimes, where there's an element of the episode that's like, you know, it's kind of problematic that this is here in the capacity that it is, and we just don't really talk about it. And then it's like, well, you know, we could just come back next year or in a couple of years to this same location and do like a sequel episode. New Earth is kind of a problematic setting. We don't really talk about it at all. And then we get to Gridlock, and it's like, here's our sequel episode, pretty much, where we return to this idea that we'd set up previously and didn't really talk about as much, and we can actually explore the issues with it and resolve some stuff. I'd love Kerblam a lot more if we eventually get an episode that goes back to like the planet they're based out of, and it's like, maybe there are still some problems that we have to fix here, and I would feel the same way coming off of this. this is a great pair of episodes, but the Ood stuff is kind of an issue. If we didn't come back to it eventually, it would be a real ding against this episode that they're just there and we never resolve it properly.
A cinema sins ding.
But that's my whole thing about, like, I don't care if they didn't use them to their fullest extent here, as long as they eventually use them to their fullest extent. If Kaplan came back and said, like, capitalism was horrible and stuff like that, I would be, like, not so mad about that episode as it is now. It's like, well, this is bad.
It reminds me of the Amanda Hagen talking about Kablam as an episode and her fix for it. The terrorist guy is actually successful, and then they view him as a hero. So then the conflict is, if terrible things lead to better results, like, do the ends justify the means? And that should be the moral conflict, which make that episode a hell of a lot more interesting than what we got. But I think we should let Rob continue his thoughts on the episode, feeling very self-conscious that he made one point, and then we went on an entire tangent about the Ood.
One of the first people to mention the Ood. We hadn't really talked much about the Ood at that point, so I get it. But yeah, I'll carry on. Still listening to positive stuff. Murray Gold's music here is terrific. Possible Planet track itself is absolutely amazing. Like when Toby is sort of stood on the surface of the planet. Great track, and I love the use of the lone Dalek at the end, especially, which is the track from when the Dalek kills itself in, well, Dalek from Series 1. It's an amazing track, and it works here when they reuse it. The episodes look great.
Don't hurt yourself thinking for positive.
There's some good tension in episode 1 when the Ood are being taken over by the Beast. There's some good tension there. It builds up to a pretty decent cliffhanger, even if it goes on a bit long. And the story definitely does have some standout scenes. Like, I'm thinking particularly in episode 2, a bit I really love, and it sums up how well directed the episodes are, is when they're escaping and Toby sort of slyly reveals himself to the Ood as still being under the influence. You see those red eyes and them going, shush. And it's a fantastic, like, really subtle moment. It's a great twist too, because we haven't seen any signs that Toby's still under the influence, and it's just a real shocking moment. I also love the bit where he just goes full on Satan in the cockpit near the end, and just you just hear the voice of the Beast as he's raving, "I am the fire and the rage," fire. And before he just gets shot out into space.
He breathes fire at one point during that too. I thought that was pretty great.
I was actually going to say, yeah, the episodes are really well directed by James Strong, which is kind of weird because if you actually look up other episodes directed by James Strong, he's not exactly one of the best directors of the series, but he usually directs pretty low-key episodes, which aren't really very memorable for the style or anything. But these episodes are very well directed, and I do love as well they brought Gabriel Wolf back as the voice of the Devil. I think he's perfect fit for it. Yeah, but these 2 episodes, I don't know. With some episodes, it's like, there's some episodes I consider overrated. I usually see other people agreeing with me, and, there's some interesting discussion. I have honestly never seen anyone else who dislikes these 2 episodes besides me. Like, everyone in this podcast, for example, is positive on it. Everyone on every Doctor Who forum I've been on loves these episodes, and saying anything about it is against them is heresy, and I just don't get it. I feel like I'm living in some alternate universe. When you say that Rose is actually good in these episodes, I don't see it. I think she's insufferably smug the whole story. She makes a lot of jokes that just aren't funny, like about 90% of the time. And the 10-Rose relationship is even more forced than it usually is. There's the scene where Rose tries to hint to the Doctor, maybe we should actually buy a house together and move in together. It just makes her, again, come across as completely creepy. Obsessed.
I do want to talk about that scene because I found that scene less annoying than I used to, because I used to find it annoying because I thought the Doctor was actually considering it, but looking at it now, he clearly is not picking up on her flirting with him at all.
That's my problem, because Russell T Davies expects us to believe that the Doctor is actually in love with her, and yet when we see most of these scenes where Rose is trying to be interested in her, he's clearly just completely what? He just clearly is not interested. At school reunion, they even make a whole episode basically saying that the Doctor and Rose cannot be together.
I'm never convinced by the relationship because I personally just don't want to think of the Doctor as a romantic or sexual character, and this show is determined to make them that constantly, so that annoys me constantly. I think it's a consistent thing throughout Series 2 that whether I like it or not, the 10th Doctor is romantically interested in Rose, and he either can't express it or he just doesn't think that they'll ever be able to work. Like you say, they can't be together. that doesn't mean both parties don't want to be together. And I like this scene because I can read it as Rose is interested romantically and the Doctor is not, so I can project like my bias onto it. But let's not act like Rose is being too creepy when she's like, we're gonna have to like get a house somewhere. Like, as far as they know, the TARDIS is gone. They are eventually going to have to do that, and it doesn't really make sense for them to not do it together.
With the way Rose just instantly jumps into it, like,
I think she acts like that is because they're trying to make themselves feel better, or just, it's like, look, we're stuck here. Maybe, we can start our life together. And I think some of the stuff that this comes across as Ten not seeming interested is more, he's just kind of in his own headspace, which I've seen many, many times throughout.
He's more upset over losing the TARDIS. I swear he's more upset over losing the TARDIS in this episode than Rose, I think. Maybe I'm just headcanoning that. But then again, he spends a whole series kind of moping over Rose, so I'm probably wrong.
Clearly, the most ridiculous thing about that scene is that either of them were going to be able to buy a house. In this economy, in the far future, come on.
We've got no money.
You're going to have to get a mortgage, and it's like, he's not going to get a mortgage.
Excellent.
Why do we know what the economy's like in the year 29, 30, or whatever this is supposed to be?
Bad. It's going to get worse.
9,000 years? Coronavirus will still be here?
I mean, not to be a bummer, but technically it could probably just still be around. We'll just be able to fight it effectively. Like, the Black Plague never technically left. It just doesn't kill as many people as it used to.
Come to think of it, too, in the actual episode, they mentioned the Empire. Are they fascists?
I remember I used to have a whole book on the history of the Earth Empire in Doctor Who, and apparently it comes to an end in the Mutants. Apparently, the Mutants is the John Pertwee story is apparently supposed to be the end of the human empire.
I just love that they have a novel based on the fake empire for this series that appears in the background of Doctor Who.
I found it really interesting as a kid, actually, because timeline and everything. As far as like the Ten Rose stuff as well, I feel like they just really force it a lot in this. Like when Ten is about to drop to his death, he's basically about to tell Ida to tell Rose that he loves her, but then sort of was like, And I'm just like, oh, please, God, just stop it. There's the whole speech at the end with, I believe in Rose to defeat the devil when she actually doesn't.
Annoying in this episode.
This is the most entertaining part of the podcast so far.
That brings me on my point, which I already expressed, that 10th Doctor is absolutely dire in this story. And I love David Tennant. I love David Tennant's Doctor. Honest to God, he's like either my number 2, number 3 favorite Doctor. In this story, I just want to punch him. Maybe not literally, but he's just such an insufferable, annoying prick in this story. I just can't stand him.
What are you talking about?
For one, he spends half the story just going around screaming in people's faces, human beings, you're amazing, you lot, hugging people and just oh God.
Just imagining him watching this episode and 10 being like, I love all of you, and he's just like, that bastard.
All right, I actually like the Doctor's attitude towards loving the human race and everything. It's just the way it's delivered in this story makes me cringe. The dialogue that David Tennant is given in this story is just absolutely impossible to deliver naturally. Scream, human beings, you are amazing, when he hugs that guy. And it's just absolutely horrific. Probably literally my least favorite scene in Doctor Who history, just because of how it's written.
Did you forget what episode comes after this one? And you're saying that this is the worst episode?
Rob likes Love and
No, I
Monsters.
didn't. I already said at the beginning of my point that I don't hate these episodes exactly. I just listed a bunch of positives. Gone off track now.
You hate Rose. 10th Doctor was annoying.
Yeah, so in general, David Tennant's performance throughout this is bad because the dialogue is bad and he just can't deliver it. His whole speech, at the end of The Devil is poorly written, it's badly delivered. And he's basically, I can't get over as well, he's basically just standing there in front of a green screen shouting at a terrible CGI effect. Mm-hmm. It's horrific. Bad.
Devil bad.
And then, once he finds the TARDIS, proceeds to decide, you know what, I have a choice here between saving one human or literally an entire species. What does he do? Of course, he just saves the one human and then just sort of dismisses it with, I couldn't save the Ood. Sorry. They're all dead.
I can't get over the whole I ran out of time thing. You're in a time machine.
Time machine, yep.
Time machine.
The thing that kept coming back to me whenever I watched this episode is that bit in Futurama with the Crunkalunkas, and he's like, they think they have a good benefits package, but they don't. They're basically slaves. And I was just like, that perfectly describes the Ood.
It's another part of this weird thing that we're talking about where the Ood almost hardly feel like they're even part of the episode properly.
They're such an afterthought, even to the Doctor.
We get so close to making a statement with them and their presence in the story, but then we kind of back off from it. I will say a bit of Ten's dialogue that I really like and that I think is interesting, tied into like the whole idea of faith and stuff, is when he starts talking about like impulse and like that gut instinct. You can't explain it. There's no proper reason why you should want to like venture forward and like keep going and like go down, go down, go down, go down. And yet it's this feeling that everyone kind of has and that he just listens to implicitly. And that's kind of like listening to that impulse is what ultimately allows him to save the day. If you took his dialogue at like face value when he's talking to the devil, you could make it into this thing that like Lucy and I hate. Oh, he was the chosen one. Like someone planned this whole thing out specifically for him to show up. But no, that's not what he means when he's like, your jailers like knew that I was coming.
Somebody was coming.
He is a chosen one.
Yeah, not even a chosen one, just someone that
He's just a guy.
Yeah.
to follow that instinct of like just this need to explore in the face of danger.
Smash stuff.
Yeah, and smash stuff. It's interesting how that ties into the idea of faith and how everything is sort of like a leap of faith and just like the amount of trust that you have to have in yourself and in other people to sort of operate like that. And at the end, when he's like, next time you run into a situation like this, and then he kind of just stops and he's like, oh, what's the point? You're just going to go blundering off again anyway. Like, he says that kind of derisively, but really, like, it's good that he doesn't warn them like that because that would be warning them against the very instinct that he followed that allowed him to save the day in the end.
He's aware of that in himself, and he's like, well, if it served me properly, it'll probably serve you guys properly as well, even though it led you literally to the gates of hell in the first place.
I think the point about Rob saying about the dialogue is funny because it has one of my favorite Tennant jokes in it when they're saying, like, we come to sport, there's no turning back. Oh, did you have to? No turning back. That's almost as bad as nothing can possibly go wrong, and this is the best Christmas Walford's ever had.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, that's a good line. I'll agree with that. I'm just saying.
I like one thing in this episode.
Series 2 seems to have an Age Against EastEnders. They pop up in the finale as well.
Because Russell T Davies really likes it, apparently.
That does not surprise me, actually.
Yeah,
For those of you who don't get it, it's a soap opera.
British soap opera history, which I know for some reason, usually Christmas specials were kind of rubbish. Their first Christmas special, they had the character Dirty Den hand somebody to divorce. So ever since then, Christmas specials have been a siege of misery in order to get ratings up. In general, EastEnders is just a miserable, miserable show.
It's the
you
most
have to hate yourself to
wonderful
enjoy.
time of the year.
That's kind of the point of it, yeah.
Kiss just keeps coming up, man. There was no way of avoiding it.
We're never escaping. It's Christmas in July.
By the way, I just want to say another point of hilarity for me was that bit where the devils kind of listing all their secret fears and anxieties and like, you are always a disappointment to your father. You have never gotten over your wife. You're a virgin. Ah.
But that just shows that Toby has nothing else wrong with him at all.
And he was the one that got possessed.
Virgin.
Like, that's the worst you could come up with.
Nerd.
That's why he chose to possess him. He was like the least problematic person there.
Funny if the devil came up and said, and you enjoyed the last Star Wars movie.
Involves the Rise of Skywalker fan. Okay, as far as the episodes, ignoring the 10th Doctor for a minute and how he's portrayed, and the absolutely horrendous way they choose to handle the Ood at the end of the story. The devil has been used in Doctor Who before, in the Daemons, the John Pertwee story. I think they handled it way, 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 way better. I just do not find this villain, this giant friggin' CGI creature, interesting, no matter what voice actor you bring back to voice him. He is great, and I don't understand what the plan is. I think the Daemons was a lot more inventive than just, oh yeah, the devil's actually real and is trapped in this actual giant beast that's just trapped underneath this planet. Yeah, great. Also, I feel like as someone who's actually watched a lot of classic Doctor Who, I feel this story, I don't know, a lot of people praise this story for being original. It's just not. It's the same base under siege story you get in a lot of the classics era with a lot of running around corridors, the TARDIS going missing, which was a staple of a lot of classic stories too. I think one of the first times this happened in modern Who with the TARDIS going missing, right?
Yeah.
It didn't seem to go missing often before this story. Oh, actually no, in Bad Wolf too. But it was sort of done in a unique way there. And then he finds the TARDIS at the end in the most BS contrived way imaginable. Literally, he's about to die. Everything's collapsing around him. Oh no, it's hopeless. Nothing can possibly resolve this. I'm going to die. Oh wait, the TARDIS is there. Great. And then just, saves the day. It's just lazy writing.
Yeah, like that was the thing for me. Like, if it was any other episode, I would have been like, this is really contrived. But I'm like, what if God made it show up in this episode?
Might as well. point.
David Tennant isn't God. I think he is, right? I mean, both have committed a lot of genocides. So, they're probably good mates. I actually do not find the story very interesting. It has some standout moments. Most of the Satan Pit is just characters crawling through vents. It didn't matter anyway, because when they just get to the end, the Ood are there. The captain, whose name I can't remember.
How can you not remember the name is cool as Zach Crossflame?
I hate it. I hate it so much.
He spends the whole episode just stuck in a room. That's boring. The Doctor and Ida spend half the episode just chatting about philosophical stuff or whatever, and that's boring. But the supporting cast, for some people, even you guys have said the supporting cast in this story are interesting. No, I didn't find any of these characters interesting. Didn't even find any of them well acted, actually. Well, apart from the old guy, who, I don't know, there was something to do with his wife, but it's never mentioned. It's never really specifically brought up. I also love the bit where he sort of needlessly sacrifices himself, only for them to just leave the vents anyway, because the Ood are literally on the other side, so it was a pointless sacrifice. Yeah, that's basically it. I can't get into these two episodes. I don't know what people see in them, even after hearing all your points here. I guess it's down to subjectivity of how scurry and atmospheric you find it, how much you can tolerate Ten and Rose. I can't, and I just don't find these episodes very interesting. I find long stretches of them to be badly written, cliched, really generic, and I just can't get into these two episodes like everybody else can. I'm very sorry. I just can't get into them. Can't find another Doctor Who fan who actually... I think I read a review from the Radio Times. Patrick Mulcairn from the Radio Times, I think, is the only Doctor Who critic I've seen actually say, yeah, these episodes are actually quite overrated. Besides that, it seems like everybody likes these episodes. I just don't get why.
I was going to say, because you mentioned a guy and his kind of awful secret about his wife, you keep forgetting the other person who has a terrible secret of being a virgin.
Oh, yeah.
Truly the worst.
Well, that's why he gets killed off.
I was going to mention, because you mentioned the Daemons, it actually created a kind of meme within Classic Who. I think that's the first one with 5 rounds rapid. Basically, the whole joke with Unit is that they keep on firing at things and it's absolutely useless. I think that's one of the first episodes they've done it. They have Debray go, chap with the wings, 5 rounds rapid. And they just shoot at him and nothing happens. And this keeps on happening throughout John Pertwee's run to the point where you're like, why the hell are you shooting at these things? This is useless.
The stormtroopers of Doctor Who.
Unit?
No, yeah, there's the stormtroopers of Doctor Who, except they do hit things. It just doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
Fair.
That's somehow even worse.
I like Scooty's death, even if it is a little bit silly that I meant to feel bad because the person who died is named Scooty.
It is impossible to take a character with that name seriously.
But honestly, that scene itself is super chilling, and
I like that everybody almost throws up upon seeing.
Was that a pun you just made? Because she's in space, so she's frozen, chilling.
No, stop. No,
that would be a clever pun a very clever pun if it actually.
You're a monster, Nick.
But
she goes out and she sees Toby just standing there in the vacuum of space without a suit. Brianna, she was just nope, get out. When Toby raises his hand to beckon her outside, and she raises her hand, and it's you can tell she almost doesn't even realize she's doing it. She glances at her own hand and she's what? And puts it down. Is the way that it's implied he has subtle hypnosis. That's a really, really scary scene.
They subtle hypnosis, but a whole plot point is that he's mind controlling the Ood. Not exactly subtle, but
that scene was genuinely the highlight of the story for me.
The only problem I had with that scene is that they're he's in the vacuum of space and you can clearly see the wind blowing against his clothes, and I'm just outside.
They did that on purpose to add to the effect.
Yeah,
Scooty was in space. It literally looks like a cardboard cutout.
Yes.
The effect is so bad.
It's unfortunate, but yeah, I did have that moment of wow, that looks really not good. That looks like a YouTube amateur green screen effect.
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, this episode is from the early 2000s, so this is probably the best that they're going to get.
It's 14 years old.
2006.
So.
I've seen some really bad CG in 2005 movies.
There'd definitely be a heavy metal track in there somewhere.
Death metal. It's the only thing that fits with Satan.
I always get that thing of whenever I watch something that's back from this time period of would they do this joke nowadays? That bit where he's talking about Rose's ass, would they get away with it nowadays?
Oh, yeah.
No.
It's not a good joke, but I'm wondering if they would do it. Yeah.
What happens is Rose comments on Danny's ass. She says, "You're not giving me a great view here." And then Toby says, could be worse. Again, brings me back to the dialogue in the story. Not a fan of it.
Because nobody would like to look at Billie Piper's ass.
It's non-existent. She's a white girl.
Oof.
You're correct, but still.
The last time we were talking about penises and vaginas, this time we're talking about asses. Okay, I see where the track is going.
I want to talk about something random that I noticed during this episode that could qualify as foreshadowing. Very early on, they talk about how the planet needs to be distributing a energy pulse of like 6 to the 6th power every 6 seconds, and they're like, "That's a lot of sixes." And I was like,
"Yeah, that was cringy."
I wonder what the villain is.
See why I don't like these episodes? Do you see now?
Also, all the bloody foreshadowing to the finale, and when you know what actually happens in the finale,
like I wanted to go in like with really low expectations, but just a couple of little things pushed it up for me because I was going baseline. I was totally expecting it to be a snore fest, but just a couple little things bumped it up, so it didn't bother me as much. I really love cosmic horror so much.
You mentioned like the Ood came back in The Doctor's Wife. In The Doctor's Wife, I noticed they credited Russell T Davies as being the guy who came up with the Ood. So this is the only Doctor Who story written by Matt Jones, who I don't think anyone has ever seen a picture of or like ever known. So did write an episode of Touchwood. That's basically the only thing I know he's ever written. There's a big rumor that Russell T Davies basically wrote a large majority of this story, and it does actually quite feel like a Russell T Davies story. It doesn't, and I know Matt Jones hasn't written for the show otherwise. I do remember hearing, I don't know if there's a source for it, but this was a story that was like heavily rewritten by Russell T Davies to the point where Matt Jones basically just had nothing to do with it, almost nothing to do with it. And it seemed like Davies was like that with a lot of stories. He would like heavily rewrite most stories. Like I think he said something like, "People criticize me but praise human nature and the family of blood." I wonder if like how they reacted, they know how much of that story I wrote, something like that, which sort of like brought that out into the open.
That doesn't sound egotistical at all.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember reading that Matt Jones, before this story came out, would not take any interviews, the press or anything like that. He wouldn't like show his face or anything or talk about the story, which is kind of unusual because most Doctor Who writers do interviews, and he was like kind of the only one who didn't.
He's a very shy man.
So it's quite interesting. It's just an interesting theory that Russell T Davies basically just wrote this whole story.
Even the story behind it is just a complete mystery. Everything about this episode is so mysterious.
Who even is Matt Jones?
Maybe Matt Jones is Satan.
Think of when I think Matt Jones is Badger from Breaking Bad. The fact I just have this funny image in my head of him writing this episode.
That probably explains why I don't like most of the Russell T Davies era, because it sounds like he just took most of the episodes and wrote them himself and then stuck someone else's name on them.
Yeah.
Moffat usually gave most writers some leeway, and during the Capaldi era, he basically just decided, right, if I've basically written this episode, then I will just like attach my name to it. I think Davies started to do that as well with like Planet of the Dead and The Waters of Mars. Apparently The Unicorn and the Wasp was another one that he basically just wrote himself, but like allowed Gareth Roberts to take the credit. Apparently the only writers whose scripts that he never touched were like Stephen Moffat, Chris Chibnall, and I think Stephen Greenhorn, which is quite strange. Like the fact that he looked at the script for The Doctor's Daughter and just thought, this is perfect. I'm not even going to touch it.
This is something he would write.
I never would touch it.
Genius! This will be an instant classic. Like just like the Lazarus Experiment was, Stephen. Oh, you're a genius.
I just want to say one point about his crack about the family of blood is really interesting to me, considering it's based on a novel, and the novel's writer is also credited as writing the script.
Yeah, I think what Davies basically did with that is he basically just rewrote the whole novel for TV, kind of like what a screenwriter does for a movie or whatever, but he credited it to Paul Cornell because it's basically his story. I haven't actually read the book, but apparently the book has a section where Paul Cornell explains which bits he wrote in the TV story. I'll have to actually read the book.
Russell T Davies was very hands-on as a head writer. Moffat was less so. I didn't hear about the whole thing about him like literally just writing scripts and crediting them to other people. But the thing about the Ood, him being created, he does do that thing where he will create ideas and characters and concepts, but have other writers introduce them. With Jack Harkness, he was the one who created Jack, but he was introduced in Moffat's script, so because he just told Moffat to introduce him because he had a bigger plan for him. So that could have been what happened, that he said, I have these Ood creatures, can you just introduce them because I'm going to use them down the line? Because he did plan stories in advance. As dumb as some of his stories are, he did plan them in advance.
The thing I found interesting about it is that it didn't even credit Matt Jones at all. With other classic monsters, you'll see, like, say, Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis sort of were credited for co-creating the Cybermen, because Jerry Davis was the script editor and Kit Pedler was the writer of The 10th Planet and the guy who actually came up with them, but Jerry Davis sort of script edited The 10th Planet. Whereas with the Ood, it's like you don't see the Ood like created by Russell T Davies and Matt Jones, with Matt Jones like writing it. You just see created by Russell T Davies. So that sort of adds to my theory that he basically wrote 95% of this story.
Is Moffat credited for Jack Harkness?
I think Russell T Davies created Jack. Moffat developed his personality because Russell T Davies has said that he basically just left Moffat's scripts. Actually, an interesting thing about Moffat is that he basically wrote a lot of Vincent and the Doctor, because Richard Curtis has actually been quite open about how he basically just wrote the script and just gave it to Moffat and said, right, if there's anything you don't like here or want to change, let's like go through it. And apparently Moffat changed a lot of the script and they went through it together on it quite excessively. But otherwise, I think Moffat had a reputation for actually just letting the guest writers get on with it.
These 2 episodes are good. Rob doesn't like them, and he's entitled to that opinion.
Scorching hot take.
Yeah, I just think it has some dumb Davis stuff. Like, I really hate the building up to the finale. Beyond that, they're really good. They really hold up. I don't have a problem with the dialogue as much. They have some dumb jokes that haven't aged very well, but beyond that, and I think it opens really weakly, but beyond that, I think it's really interesting. And I wish that Doctor Who would go into more cosmic horror stuff like this. It's a lot of fun. It's not like Midnight where it feels different from a Doctor Who story. This feels like Doctor Who does this kind of cosmic devil horror kind of thing, and cute and quirky, and I really enjoy it. It's probably not one of the best stories ever from the Russell T Davies era. There are definitely a lot stronger ones, but I think it's really solid for what it is. So yeah. Also, I just really like hearing Gabriel Wolf's voice. I hope they bring him back. They probably won't, but I hope they do.
I'm behind you, Toby.
I think I like the first episode, The Impossible Planet, a little bit more, just because
by
the nature of, and like not for any of the other obvious reasons that we were stating before, but mostly because in terms of like cosmic horror, the less you explain, the scarier it is. So a lot of the build-up, there was never going to be anything that could really live up to that, especially not that crappy CGI devil that we got. So I like that they didn't try to explain too much. Like, it's Tennant just kind of postulating a lot of the time based on some like random cave drawings. But I feel like if they had gone even more abstract, it could have worked. It would be hard to write that, especially in that era of television. But I think they probably could have pulled it off. But for what it is, I liked it a lot. And the first episode is just, for me, a lot better because of the nature of the story. Like, you can't have an answer to the mystery and have it be satisfying when the mystery is the whole point. But yeah, hail Satan. Love the guy. He's great.
All I'm going to say is I still really enjoy these episodes. They have a lot of Russell T Davies cliches and like
cheese.
The cheese. There's always so much cheese in Russell T Davies. But for a Russell T Davies episode, I still really like these and enjoy these and put these on for fun. But anyway, I think we exhausted everything. Bye.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.